The dust from the road was a fine, gritty film on Jack Reacher's skin. The town of Tres Cruces, New Mexico, hadn't been a destination. It was just a place where the bus sighed to a stop, and on a whim, he'd decided to get off. It was a single-street town baked into existence by a relentless sun, a place that time seemed to have forgotten, or perhaps had deliberately bypassed. The air was thin and dry, carrying the scent of creosote and distant, forgotten rain. Reacher had nothing but the clothes on his back, a foldable toothbrush in his pocket, and a passport that said he was who he was. He needed nothing more. He was just passing through. He walked into the only diner, a place called the Dusty Spoon. The bell above the door gave a tired jingle. A few locals hunched over coffee at the counter, their faces etched with the lines of hard lives. They looked up as he entered, their eyes lingering for a moment too long. It wasn't simple curiosity. It was a heavy, appraising silence. Reacher was used to being noticed. At 6'5", with a chest like a barrel and hands that looked like they could crush stone, he didn't blend in. But this was different. This was the watchfulness of prey. He took a stool at the far end of the counter. A waitress, a woman whose youth was fading under a layer of exhaustion, approached him. "What can I get you?" she asked, her voice low, almost a whisper. "Coffee," Reacher said. "Black, and a slice of whatever pie is freshest." "Apple," she said, not meeting his eyes. "Just made." She brought the coffee. It was strong and bitter, just how he liked it. As he drank, he listened, not to the quiet chatter, but to the spaces between the words. The fear was a palpable thing in the room, thick as the dust on the windowsills. A group of men in work-worn clothes were talking near the door, their voices hushed. Reacher caught a few words. The shipment, Santiago's men, another one missing. They fell silent as a new pickup truck, far too clean and expensive for this town, rumbled past the diner. The men at the counter stiffened. Even the waitress paused, her hand frozen over a coffee pot. Reacher watched the truck disappear down the road. He turned his attention back to his pie. It was good. He was finishing the last bite when two men walked in. They weren't locals. They wore expensive boots and crisp shirts that strained against muscular frames. Their belts were cinched tight, and the bulges under their shirts were not from love handles. They scanned the diner, their eyes cold and flat like a snake's. Their gaze settled on Reacher. One of them, a man with a jagged scar bisecting his left eyebrow, walked over. His partner stood by the door, a silent, menacing statue. "You're new," the scarred man said. It wasn't a question. Reacher took a final sip of his coffee. "Just passing through." "People don't just pass through Tres Cruces," the man sneered. "They have business here. Or they're lost. Which one are you?" "Neither," Reacher said calmly. "Just thirsty." The man's eyes narrowed. "I think you're lost, and I think you should find your way out of town. Now." Reacher looked at the man. He saw the cheap confidence of a bully who was used to people cowering. He saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand hovered near his hip. He also saw the slight tremor in his hand, the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. This man wasn't the top of the food chain. He was just a dog on a leash. "I'll leave when I'm finished with my coffee," Reacher said, his voice even. The scarred man chuckled, a harsh, grating sound. "You don't get it, do you, big man? This is our town. We say who comes and who goes." He gestured to his partner at the door. "And we say you go." The waitress watched, her face pale, a dishcloth twisted in her hands. The locals at the counter were suddenly very interested in their coffee cups. Nobody was going to intervene. Reacher was on his own. He always was. "I paid for the coffee," Reacher said. "I'm going to drink it." The man's patience snapped. He reached out to grab Reacher's shoulder. It was a mistake. Reacher's arm moved in a blur. He didn't block the hand. He caught it, his fingers wrapping around the man's wrist. He squeezed, not hard, just enough. The man's eyes widened in pain and surprise as the bones in his wrist ground together. A choked gasp escaped his lips. "I think," Reacher said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl, "that you should go." He released the wrist with a slight push. The man stumbled back, cradling his hand, his face a mask of disbelief and agony. His partner by the door tensed, his hand going to the gun under his shirt. Reacher didn't even look at him. His eyes were locked on the scarred man. "Get out," Reacher said. The two men exchanged a look. The bravado was gone, replaced by a cold fury. They backed out of the diner, the bell on the door mocking their retreat. The silence they left behind was heavier than before. Reacher calmly finished his coffee. He placed a few bills on the counter, more than enough to cover the check. The waitress finally moved, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and something else. A flicker of hope. "You shouldn't have done that," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You don't know who they are." "I know what they are," Reacher replied, standing up. "They're bullies, and I don't like bullies." He walked out of the diner and into the oppressive heat of the New Mexico sun. He knew he couldn't leave now. They had tried to push him, and Reacher didn't get pushed. He was just passing through, but the cartel had just made it personal. He started walking down the main street, his destination unknown. He was a problem solver, and Tres Cruces had a big problem. The first step was to understand its size and shape. He found the town's only motel, a sad-looking place with a flickering neon sign that advertised vacancy. The man behind the counter was old and frail, with fear etched so deeply into his face it looked like part of his bone structure. Reacher paid for a room in cash. The man's hands shook as he took the money. "They'll be back for you," the old man whispered, not looking up from the worn ledger. "Santiago doesn't let things go." "Santiago?" Reacher asked. The old man flinched as if the name itself was a physical blow. He just shook his head and pushed a key across the counter. Room 7. The room was Spartan, a bed, a small table, and a window that looked out onto an alley filled with trash. It was perfect. Reacher sat on the edge of the bed and thought. Santiago. The name had been whispered in the diner. This was the man in charge. The two thugs were his enforcers, a classic small-town takeover. He'd seen it before in different forms. A corrupt businessman, a local gang, but the efficiency and the depth of the fear suggested something more organized. The clean pickup truck, the professional-looking thugs. This felt bigger. His thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. It wasn't a loud, aggressive knock. It was hesitant. Reacher moved silently to the side of the door, his body coiled. "Who is it?" It's Sarah, from the diner." Reacher opened the door a few inches. The waitress stood there, looking even more frightened than before. She clutched her purse to her chest like a shield. "I had to warn you," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "They're not just bullies. They're killers. They work for the Salazar Cartel. Santiago is Ricardo Salazar's nephew. They run everything here. The sheriff, the mayor, everyone is on their payroll or too scared to do anything." "Why are you telling me this?" Reacher asked, his eyes scanning the street behind her. "Because I saw what you did," she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. "No one has stood up to them. Not since they took my brother." Her voice broke on the last word. "He was a deputy. He tried to investigate a truck that went off the road. They found his car empty a week later. They said he ran off, but he didn't. They took him." Here it was. The personal connection. The reason the town was suffocating. The cartel wasn't just passing through. It had put down roots and poisoned the soil. "What do they want with this town?" Reacher asked. "It's a transport point," Sarah explained. "The main highway is miles away, but there are old smuggling routes through the mountains into Mexico. They move drugs, guns, people, anything that makes money. They use local businesses as fronts. The trucking company, the old packing plant. They own it all." "Where do they operate from?" She hesitated. "There's a large ranch north of town, the Double S. It belongs to Santiago. It's heavily guarded. No one gets in or out without his permission." Reacher nodded slowly. A fortified position. That was logical. "Thank you, Sarah. You've been brave coming here." "Brave or stupid," she said with a humorless smile. Please, just leave town. They will kill you and no one will say a word. They started this, Reacher said. I'm going to finish it. Sarah looked at him, at the absolute certainty in his eyes. For the first time, the fear in her own eyes was replaced by a dangerous spark of hope. She nodded once, then turned and hurried away, disappearing into the twilight. Reacher closed the door. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and blood red. Night was coming to Tres Cruces. For the cartel, it would be their last. Reacher didn't sleep. He sat in the dark, listening to the sounds of the town dying down. He was planning. The cartel had numbers, weapons, and a home field advantage. Reacher had himself. It would have to be enough. Around midnight, a car pulled into the motel parking lot, its engine cut abruptly. Doors opened and closed softly. Footsteps on gravel, slow and deliberate. They were coming for him. He had expected it. He had counted on it. He moved away from the door, melting into the deepest shadows of the room. The doorknob turned slowly, silently. They were trying to be quiet. Amateurs. The lock clicked. The door swung inward, revealing 3 silhouettes against the faint light of the parking lot. They paused, letting their eyes adjust to the darkness. The first man stepped inside, a pistol with a suppressor held at the ready. The second followed, and the third stayed at the doorway, watching their backs. He's not here, the first man whispered. Check the bathroom, the second one hissed. The first man moved toward the bathroom door. As he passed the bed, Reacher exploded from the darkness. He was a force of nature, an avalanche of controlled violence. He slammed a massive forearm into the back of the man's neck. The man dropped without a sound, his gun clattering on the floor. The second man spun around, raising his weapon, but he was too slow. Reacher was already on him. He kicked the man's knee sideways. The joint shattered with a sickening crunch. The man screamed, a high-pitched sound that was cut short as Reacher's elbow connected with his temple. He crumpled to the ground. The third man at the door raised his pistol to fire. Reacher scooped the dropped gun off the floor and fired once. The suppressed thud was barely audible. The man at the door grunted and fell backward out of the doorway. Silence. It had taken less than 5 seconds. Reacher stood over the 2 unconscious men in the room. He checked their pulses. They were alive. He preferred it that way. Dead men can't answer questions. He dragged them both into the room and closed the door. He used their own belts to tie them to the room's only 2 chairs. He waited. It took about 20 minutes for the first one, the one with the broken knee, to regain consciousness. He groaned, his eyes fluttering open. He saw Reacher sitting on the bed, watching him. Fear, pure and primal, flooded his face. "Who sent you?" Reacher asked, his voice a calm, chilling whisper in the dark room. The man just whimpered, clutching his shattered knee. "I'm going to ask you again," Reacher said, his voice unchanging. "Who sent you? If you don't answer, I'm going to break your other knee, and then your arms, and then I'll start on your friend." He gestured to the other unconscious man. "I have all night." The man's resolve crumbled. "Santiago," he choked out. "Santiago sent us. He said to get rid of the big guy at the motel." "How many men does he have at the ranch?" I don't know, 20? 30 maybe? They're well armed. Automatic weapons, body armor. It's a fortress." "What's the layout?" Sweat beaded on the man's forehead. "There's a main house, a large barn, and a few outbuildings, a fence all around, armed guards at the gate and on patrol." "What's happening at the ranch tonight?" Reacher pressed. "What's the shipment I heard about?" "A big one," the man gasped. "Cocaine, from Mexico. It's coming in tonight. They're loading it into trucks at the old packing plant just east of town. Santiago and most of the senior guys will be there to oversee it." That was the key. The hub of the operation. And the leadership would be concentrated in one place. It was a golden opportunity. "Thank you," Reacher said. "You've been very helpful." He stood up and, with a single precise strike, knocked the man unconscious again. He did the same to the other man when he started to stir. He left them tied up for the local police to find, or more likely for their own people to clean up. It didn't matter. They had served their purpose. Reacher slipped out of the motel room and into the night, the packing plant, east of town. He started walking. The moon was a sliver in the sky, offering little light. The air was cool now, and the desert was alive with the soft sounds of nocturnal creatures. He found the packing plant easily. It was a large, dilapidated structure on the edge of Tres Cruces, surrounded by a high chain-link fence. Lights blazed inside, and the low rumble of a diesel engine could be heard. Two large semi-trucks were backed up to a loading dock. Men with rifles moved in the shadows, their figures silhouetted against the bright interior lights. Reacher counted at least a dozen guards outside. There would be more inside. This wasn't a job for a frontal assault. This was a job for a ghost. He circled the perimeter, keeping to the deepest shadows. He found what he was looking for. A section of the fence at the back of the property that was hidden from view by a line of overgrown mesquite trees. He used his bare hands to find a purchase in the chain link and pulled himself up and over, landing silently on the other side. He moved like a shadow along the back wall of the plant, his eyes and ears taking in everything. The guards were alert, but they were looking outward, expecting a threat from the road, not from within their own perimeter. He found a grimy window and peered inside. The scene was one of organized crime in motion. Pallets loaded with bricks of cocaine were being moved by forklift from one of the trucks into the plant. A group of men, better dressed than the guards, stood watching. One of them, a man with a cruel, handsome face and an expensive leather jacket, was clearly in charge. Santiago. He was laughing, clapping another man on the back. They were confident, arrogant. They believed they were untouchable in their little kingdom. Reacher needed a distraction, something big. His eyes fell on a large diesel fuel tank near the side of the building, used to power the plant's generators. A plan began to form in his mind. It was simple, brutal, and effective. He found a discarded length of pipe. He moved silently to the fuel tank. A single guard was posted nearby, but he was more interested in his phone than his surroundings. Reacher closed the distance in 3 long, silent strides. The guard never knew what hit him. A single sharp blow to the base of the skull, and he crumpled. Reacher looked at the tank's valve. He took a deep breath, then used the pipe as a lever, forcing the valve open. Diesel fuel began to gush out, forming a dark, shimmering pool on the ground. The smell was sharp and pungent. The pool spread quickly, flowing under the loading dock and toward the trucks. Reacher then found the plant's main electrical junction box on the outside wall. He pried it open with the pipe. Inside was a mess of thick cables and circuit breakers. He took out the foldable toothbrush from his pocket. It had a metal spine. He wedged it between 2 of the main terminals. He knew it wouldn't last long, but it would be long enough. Then, he walked to the front of the plant, staying in the shadows. He found a rock, about the size of his fist. He took aim at one of the large floodlights illuminating the yard. He threw it. The light shattered with a loud pop, plunging a section of the yard into darkness. "What was that?" someone shouted. Guards started moving toward the darkened area, their rifles raised. That was the first part of the distraction. The second was about to begin. Inside the junction box, the metal toothbrush heated up. Sparks flew. With a loud crackle and a flash of brilliant blue light, the main circuit breaker blew, shorting out the entire electrical system. All the lights in and around the plant went out simultaneously, plunging the entire operation into absolute darkness. Confusion erupted. Men shouted in the dark. Santiago was yelling orders that no one could follow, and in that chaos, Reacher moved. He entered the plant through a side door he'd jimmied open. The inside was a labyrinth of machinery and stacked crates. The air was thick with the smell of cocaine and diesel fuel. He moved by sound and memory, a predator in his element. A man stumbled past him in the dark. Reacher's hand shot out, grabbing him by the throat and pulling him into the shadows. A quick, silent takedown. 1 down. He could hear Santiago yelling for flashlights. Someone found one. A powerful beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the vast room. Reacher froze behind a stack of pallets, becoming one with the shadows. The beam passed over him. He used the intermittent flashes of light to navigate. He was a phantom, taking out guards one by one. A chokehold here, a devastating elbow strike there. He was silent, efficient, and utterly ruthless. The cartel members were armed and dangerous, but they were fighting an enemy they couldn't see, a force that struck from the darkness and vanished. Panic began to set in. Their nervous gunfire was sporadic and wild, illuminating the chaos for brief, terrifying moments. Reacher worked his way toward the loading dock, toward Santiago. He could hear his voice, laced with a mixture of rage and growing fear. "Find him! Find him, you useless bastards!" Reacher saw him. Santiago was using another man as a shield, a pistol in his hand. He was near the open bay of the semi-truck. The diesel fuel that Reacher had released had pooled all around the area. The smell was overpowering. All Reacher needed now was a spark. He saw a guard fumbling with a cigarette lighter trying to get some light. A terrible idea. Reacher didn't need to stop him. The guard flicked the lighter. The world erupted in a ball of fire. The diesel fuel ignited with a deafening whoomp. A wave of heat and flame washed across the loading dock, engulfing the trucks. Men screamed as the fire found them. The air was sucked out of the building, replaced by roaring flames and thick black smoke. Reacher had anticipated the blast, diving behind a solid piece of machinery. The heat washed over him, but he was protected. He came up, his eyes scanning the fiery chaos. Santiago had been thrown by the explosion. He was on the ground, his expensive jacket on fire, beating at the flames with his hands. He scrambled to his feet, his face a mask of terror, and staggered away from the inferno, deeper into the plant. Reacher went after him. The fire was spreading fast, consuming the old wooden structure. The roof groaned, and sparks rained down like angry fireflies. Smoke burned his lungs. He cornered Santiago in a small office at the back of the plant. The cartel boss had found another flashlight and had it trained on the door, his hand shaking, his gun wavering. "Who are you?" Santiago shrieked, his voice raw with smoke and fear. "The devil?" Reacher stepped into the beam of light, his face grim, his eyes like chips of ice. "No," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I'm just a guy who was passing through. You and your men made the mistake of asking me to leave." Santiago fired. The shot went wide, smashing a filing cabinet behind Reacher. Before he could fire again, Reacher crossed the room in 2 strides. He slapped the gun from Santiago's hand. It clattered across the floor. Santiago stared at the giant in front of him, his arrogance completely gone, replaced by the stark realization of his own mortality. He was just a man, and the man in front of him was something else entirely. He tried to run. Reacher grabbed him by the back of his collar and slammed him against the wall. The drywall cracked. "This is for the deputy," Reacher said, his voice cold. "And for everyone in this town you've terrorized." He hit him once. A single, precise, devastating punch to the jaw. Santiago's head snapped back and he slid to the floor unconscious. Reacher left him there. The roar of the fire was growing louder. Sirens wailed in the distance. The whole town would be awake now. His work was done. He found a back exit and slipped out into the cool night air. He didn't look back at the flames consuming the cartel's empire. He walked away from the chaos, a solitary figure moving through the desert shadows. By the time the first fire trucks and police cars arrived, he was gone. The authorities would find the packing plant destroyed, the cartel's shipment turned to ash, and a dozen or so unconscious or injured thugs. They would find Santiago in the office, and in the motel, they would find 3 more of his men tied up. The next morning, Reacher was at the bus stop on the edge of town. The sun was rising, casting a clean new light over Tres Cruces. As he waited, a familiar car pulled up. It was Sarah. She got out and walked over to him. "It was you," she said. It wasn't a question. "The news is calling it a rival gang war. An explosion at the plant. They're saying the cartel imploded." "Sounds plausible," Reacher said. "They found evidence at the ranch," she continued, a small, genuine smile finally reaching her eyes. "Evidence my brother had been collecting. Federal agents are on their way. Santiago is talking. He's giving up everyone to save himself. It's over. It's really over. She looked at him, her expression a mix of gratitude and awe. Thank you. You gave us our town back. I just finished my coffee, Reacher said. The bus appeared on the horizon, a distant shimmer of heat on the highway. Where will you go? Sarah asked. Reacher shrugged. Don't know. Wherever this bus is going. He had no destination. He had no plan. He was just passing through. The bus pulled up with a hiss of air brakes. Reacher got on, paid the driver in cash, and took a seat by the window. He didn't look back as the bus pulled away, leaving Tres Cruces and its newfound peace behind him. The dust of the road was already calling.